I Hate Politics is a podcast about a human activity we love to hate. I am Sunil Dasgupta. The Ohio Supreme Court just struck down electoral district maps drawn by the Republican-controlled state legislature to the applause of Democrats in the state and around the country. Most Democrats in Maryland, however, would like to put redistricting to bed and move on to the task of governing. Some Republicans are not having it. State Delegate Kathy Szeliga headlines a lawsuit on state legislative districts that is organized by a group called Fair Maps Maryland, which is led by a former aide to Governor Larry Hogan, Doug Mayer. And congressional candidate Neil Parrott headlines a second suit on congressional districts that is organized by the national right-wing group Judicial Watch. Dominique Bonessi talks to Doug Mayer, and I talk to the chair of the Hogan-appointed Citizens Redistricting Commission and registered Republican Walter Olson to try to get to the bottom. If you are new to the show, I Hate Politics is a podcast about our neighborhoods, workplaces, schools and streets, and our local governments as they function in diverse and democratic societies. This means our politics are messy, dirty, sometimes corrupt, with often self-serving politicians. But no matter how much we may hate politics, we are never exempt from it, even when we refuse to participate. In fact, the purpose of politics is to keep society functioning precisely when we don't agree with each other, like now. It is my hope that this podcast will help those who feel left out reconnect in our local communities. When Shannon speaks. Music for this episode comes from the Airport 77s, a 70s power pop and new wave band from Silver Spring in Montgomery County, Maryland. Andy Sullivan on vocals and guitar, Chuck Dolan on bass, and John Kelly on the drums. We are playing songs from their 2021 album, Rotation, which got a lot of play and was named the #1 album by the Evan Davis Show on WFMU in New Jersey. And we take New Jersey real seriously. The Maryland General Assembly started its 2022 session this week, and there are many bills we are watching. But what I am most intently looking at is how the General Assembly deals with the politics of budget windfall that the state finds itself in. The budget is still the governor's document. The legislature is able to take out budget items, but not add new ones. This will change after this year when a new governor takes office. A statewide referendum gave the legislature the power to move money from one spending account to another, provided it did not change the governor's total budget figure. But for now, Governor Larry Hogan holds the stronger hand, and he's likely to propose a tax cut, while Democrats want to spend money on fixing the government itself. The politics of budget surplus is rare, and if you missed the episode with Maryland House of Delegates Majority Leader Eric Lutke and UMBC budget expert Roy Myers, it came out December 31st. You won't be disappointed. Montgomery County Delegate Mark Corman is working on a bill that seeks to disallow matching state funds from being used when school districts install fossil fuel energy systems in new and existing schools. If a school district wants to buy a fossil fuel-based HVAC, they will now have to pay for it themselves. This is a way of requiring schools to speed up their adoption of renewable energy, including local generation. Several pilot projects have demonstrated the possibility of net zero emission schools across the U.S., including in Maryland, but adoption by school systems has been slow. Montgomery County Public Schools has for years been slow walking its solar roof rollout. The school board is considering a new sustainability plan, but will not formally commit to meeting the county's Climate Action Plan benchmarks of 80% reduction in greenhouse gases by 2027 and 100% reduction by 2035. If you're watching any particular bills in Annapolis, drop us a line to say why. You can email the show at ihppod@gmail.com. MCPS has been in news in not good ways since the start of the new year. First, the school district constructed a color-coded red, green, and yellow chart showing COVID rates in all of its 209 schools. Schools were then put in red category if the COVID rates were over 5%. 11 schools in red were turned over to virtual learning. But a few days later, COVID rates in more than half of the 209 schools crossed the 5% threshold. And then MCPS abandoned the whole color coding system, pointing to a clarification from the state of Maryland as justification. Now, the decision to close a school is to be made on a case-by-case basis by a committee of health and school officials. It's unclear who exactly these officials are, and the case-by-case approach for all practical purposes pushes down to the family the decision whether to send their kids to school or not. There is no guarantee that absences will be excused, even though state law and MCPS rules say that student absences during a state of emergency that we have right now should be excused. And there is also no guarantee that students will receive virtual instruction if they choose rather than being forced to remain at home. Bus drivers, teachers, paraeducators, and other staff who are infected cannot come to school. In some schools, 30% of the staff are missing. In other schools, several grade levels have been turned over to virtual learning. Montgomery County made a formal request to Governor Hogan for National Guard and other resources to make up the bus driver shortage, but it seems they were turned down. The situation is grim, except for the prediction that the Omicron variant is fast-moving and we may be cresting now. You're listening to I Hate Politics. I'm Sunil Dasgupta. Up next, Dominique Bonessi interviews Doug Mayer about the lawsuit he has organized targeting state legislative redistricting.
When you're kissing on me, do you think of James McAvoy? McAvoy, I mean, I get it. He's really dreamy. In certain situations, I'd even call him steamy. When you're kissing on me, do you think of James McAvoy? McAvoy, I mean, I get it. It rings your bell, but I wanna be the one to make your heart swell.
Doug Mayer, welcome to I Hate Politics. Let's start with who makes up Fair Maps Maryland and who your supporters are.
During the course of the last 6 months, it's been myself and our board members. So Jim Broshin, who's a former Democratic a state senator from Baltimore County, and then Alan Kittleman, a Republican, former state senator and former county executive from Howard County. It was just us just talking to the press and trying to get the message out there that, hey, redistricting is happening here in Maryland right now. There's going to be this conversation. There's going to be this debate. It's important for people to understand, not just that they're redrawing the lines. And gerrymandering has occurred in America for a long time, hundreds of years. But it's really only over the last 20 years where it's gotten really, really bad because of the technology that's available.
Fair Maps Maryland, it seems like their mission is to terminate gerrymandering, as Governor Hogan has said in the past on the Supreme Court steps with Arnold Schwarzenegger. How can we even adopt a different system of redistricting when the Constitution gives the responsibility to the legislature? So basically, we're asking legislators to willingly give up power that they could, that could impact their own elections, irrespective of the party. Why would anyone want to do this? I guess that's my question to you. And then where is the groundswell for this kind of change, except amongst Republicans in Maryland and Democrats in Texas who really don't have electoral power in the first place?
That's a great question. And I would say it is very against the nature of any politician, right, to unilaterally give up power. I would say in the case of gerrymandering, you're doing what more than 70% of Marylanders support, right? And that's probably a low ball. So you're actually doing something that's incredibly popular, right? And then, quite frankly, it's the right thing to do.
I talked to Malia Cromer from Goucher College poll, and she had a caveat to that. She says Democrats seem to want lawmakers to draw maps, and Republicans prefer citizens' commissions.
I've seen other polling that clearly indicates that a nonpartisan commission, right? Like Virginia passed last year. There was a group called Fair Maps Virginia, if you want to know where we got the name, right? And they were, and listen, Virginia is becoming a much more purple state, right? So both Republicans and Democrats essentially agreed to disarm, right? And say, hey, we need some stability here. Our voters are clearly demanding this, right? And so I think, there are plenty of purple states out there. There are plenty of states that could come up with these kind of solutions. And that's really what the governor was arguing for. What he is saying is that politicians, right, shouldn't be drawing their own boundaries, right? And I think anybody can understand that, right? That's a pretty simple concept. California has done this. Virginia has done this. There's been successful challenges in Pennsylvania and North Carolina. I don't look at it exactly like an issue like gay marriage was, but that was done. I mean, that's, the dynamics around that issue have changed in a major way in this country, but it was state by state.
So you don't think it would take some sort of interstate compact in order to get states to get on board with it?
Right. So I would say there are other Democratic states, right, that do gerrymander. New York, Illinois, there's plenty of other ones. Right now, there are more Republicans that are doing it. But just as a reminder, everybody, Texas was once gerrymandered extremely badly by Democrats, right? The times changed. Same could be said about North Carolina. What I would say this, even though I tend to favor things like states' rights, I would like a national solution to this, right? A clean commission for redistricting bill, something that didn't have a bunch of other, quote unquote, voting issues attached to it, right? 100% support that on a national level. My friends in the legislature, the Democrats, they've really gerrymandered this place, right? This isn't a little gerrymandered. This is a lot gerrymandered, to the point that in a good year for Democrats, they could have an 8-0 map, 100%. Andy Harris, with the right candidate, could absolutely lose in the right year. I think Heather Mazur, who's running against him now, I think she's a great person. I like her a lot. She's too far left for that district, even with the new map. But someone else could win that. And this state is not an 8-0 state. It's not even close. Out of the last five gubernatorial elections, 3 have been run by Republicans, right? 20 years ago, this was a 4-4 split. I think Maryland is a Democratic left of center state, right? I do not think it is a progressive state.
What are the legal bases for your lawsuit?
I think there are definitely avenues for challenges in state court on partisan gerrymander claims, very similar to what happened in Pennsylvania. Now, this is language that's in the state constitution. Obviously, it's up for interpretation by the various courts, but other states have had success, or other organizations and people have had success suing on these grounds in state court and forcing alterations to maps or complete rewritings of them. On the federal side, as we know, the Supreme Court basically said, don't bring your partisan gerrymandering claims to federal court because we don't want to see them or throw them out. But what the DOJ is doing in Texas is they're suing over, Voting Right Act violation claims, right? And I think if you look at what the DOJ is alleging happened in Texas, where they're going into a Black majority district, right, where they know the vast majority of those folks are Democrats, and they cut that district up or that location up in order to send those, those largely Democratic, and minority votes into other districts, which are probably more less minority and more majority, right? And so the argument there is you're disenfranchising, here, let's, for example, in Baltimore City and Black votes. Baltimore City's cut up 6 ways from Sunday, right? And they do that in order to spread those traditionally, loyal Democratic voters into other districts. Now, whether or not that is a legitimate Civil Rights Act that we could violation that we could take in federal court, we're still determining that, right? But that's exactly what the DOJ is claiming happened in Texas is exactly what's happening in Maryland. So if you look how Baltimore City split up now, outside of Congressman Nfume, there's 3 other white congressmen, right? I think that's an argument you could make, is you are removing a majority minority district.
What does success in the lawsuit look like to you?
A number of things could happen, right? It's possible that the Court of Appeals, orders the General Assembly to go back and redraw the whole map or redraw these sections of the map. If they come back and fail at that, then the Court of Appeals themselves can draw the map, right? It really opens up the gambit. This has happened in other states as well.
Let's say if you are successful and we get a new redistricting system in Maryland and Texas, wouldn't that mean Republicans will have fewer members of Congress?
What I'm interested in, number one, gerrymandering has gotten much worse, right? So you're sending the people to Congress who don't need to negotiate when they get there. They're getting elected for the general with their primary voters, right? Because it's the entire district are hard left or hard right, and the people who are left, don't really matter. And then we got, this is kind of counterintuitive, but the Republicans got rid of earmarks, over a decade ago, right? So we've basically sent people who aren't very smart, have no reason to compromise to Congress with nothing to negotiate with, right? And we're surprised at the results. The legislature, they've got themselves in a little bit of a bind here in Maryland. They said that, well, listen, the maps look better. Well, who cares the way they look? I mean, it's a talking point on my side. The outcome is what matters, right? And the outcome is worse. It's worse for Republicans, but I would say it's worse for Marylanders in general. So, ultimately, this is, the opposing side to my argument is, hey, we're not going to disarm until the Republicans disarm. And okay, well, then I don't know if you get to complain about who's in Congress then, right? If you don't like Andy Harris, well, Martin O'Malley invented them. So, this is what happens. And because there's consequences, you can't disenfranchise all the Republicans in Maryland. So if you push them all into one district, well, what do you think is going to happen? And if we pushed all the Democrats in the one district in Maryland, who do you think would come out of that mess? I tell you, it's not someone you want to go to get a beer with.
Do you think the 2022 elections will be affected by your lawsuit, especially if there was an injunction?
Well, listen, it's totally possible there could be an injunction and then a new map could be produced quickly, right? And so there would be new maps for the 22 election. I think if we're successful in getting an injunction, obviously that's something that we're going to be looking for. The candidate filing period gets pushed back. Maybe the primary gets pushed back a little bit. Everything gets pushed back a little bit. I think that this could happen. I think if there's action at the Court of Appeals, because it's happening at a local level and we're not looking for the Supreme Court to take action on this, I think it could all happen quickly, right? I think at most you're going to get at most, and I think this is probably an outside situation, is that the primary gets pushed back, a couple months, which has happened before. The primary has been, I think it used to be in September in Maryland years ago. So it moved into June at some point, I think maybe like 20 years ago. But I'm not a historian, so I could be wrong there. Listen, this is going to have to play out in court, and it's happened in other states along claims that we're going to be making very similar ones.
Doug Mayer, thanks for coming on I Hate Politics. We'll be following the progress of your lawsuit.
That was Dominique Bonessi interviewing Doug Mayer of Fair Maps, Maryland. I'm Sunil Dasgupta, and you're listening to I Hate Politics. I'll be back with Walter Olson, the chair of the Citizens Redistricting Commission appointed by Governor Hogan.
If he ordered the Pinot Noir, would you order the Pinot Noir? Let's take it away too far,
Walter Olson, welcome to I Hate Politics.
Thank you for having me on.
Which state legislative districts, in your view, are the most problematic as the legislature has drawn, and where are the differences between you and the legislature?
I have not tried to study all of the districts in the legislature's version in LRAC's map. I have eyeballed some of them. I think that some of the meandering districts in Anne Arundel and Howard County, for example, are good candidates for the status of it couldn't have been done this way naturally, and and political motivations are likely. I am less. Generally, Western Maryland and Montgomery County would not be the areas that I would point to. They are, in some ways, surprisingly close to what we ourselves proposed for those parts of the state. I think that there are likely to be, some of the Prince George's County ones are meandering. I don't claim to understand Prince George's County well, and our commission's deliberations on that were, more influenced by those of us on the commission who were more familiar with Prince George's County internal politics. But some of those districts also look not simply for reasons of the VRA and related issues in Western Prince George's County, where you have Hispanic district, but for reasons that don't seem to map onto that. I will say, and this is not yet public and is provisional for a reason that I'll talk about in a moment, but someone else has done an analysis of the our maps versus LRAC's maps on the standard metrics of compactness, county boundaries, and the like. And I was surprised by how much better ours did on compactness. I was expecting ours to be somewhat better. It's actually quite a gap on compactness. I thought that they had done just as well on minimizing county breaks. They did, one house was about the same. The other one, they did do significantly worse. That one, the courts are looking over their shoulder on the legislative maps for county breaks because, as you may recall, that is a ground on which the Maryland Court of Appeals has in fact struck down districts in the past, is excessive meandering across the county lines and the county city line in Baltimore. And so I knew that they were paying some attention to that, but again, they were not paying as much attention as we were. And this emerged fairly early on issues of drawing lines so as to provide opportunities and recognition for minority communities. I knew we did very well. And again, the analysis seems to confirm that the legislature's map is significantly less good in providing minority opportunities or recognizing minority communities for as far as numbers of seats. Those are, of course, our overall measures. They do not tell you whether a particular squiggly district in Anne Arundel was simply what they had to accept because they tried everything else, and that was the only the thing that worked. Especially because this gets into the politics of it, and we were instructed to blind ourselves, and I tried to avoid, therefore, learning about what candidates might want in districts. I don't feel I'm a great commentator on those political motivations. There are a couple of aspects, especially in the congressional map, where it's such common knowledge, like the situation with Steny Hoyer's district, that I feel like everyone else in Maryland, I have an opinion on that. But when it comes to legislative districts, I tried not to know the personalities. I tried not to know what any of them might want or not want.
This is very interesting because it seems like you don't have a specific complaint with respect to legislative districts, except a general complaint about crossing county lines, but not specifically about this district or that district. But then is the real impetus really the congressional districts and the legislative districts just sort of along for the ride?
Oh, no. There are some quite meandering districts in central Maryland. Part of the workings of our commission, I will freely say, is that on Anne Arundel County, for example, another county in which I don't really know the communities as well as many other people, we had 2 members from Anne Arundel County. We let them take the lead. I, like many people, kind of took on faith that they understood how the communities connected with each other. And I mean, let me turn to Howard County, which I do know more about and paid more attention to. I was very proud that we got Columbia into one Senate district. And, soon thereafter, people in Howard County, some of them said, oh, no, we deliberately are not putting Columbia into one district because there is Eastern Howard County would feel left out if given its own district. Well, that's a legitimate philosophy. On the other hand, we were under marching orders to try to identify coherent communities and draw lines around them as districts if possible. And Columbia, although not incorporated, sure is that. So that the LRAC map does it differently. The LRAC map, like the previous map, breaks up Columbia. And, there may be politics in there about how Columbia, therefore, gets to be the dominant force in more than one district. Knowing how politically sophisticated Columbia people are, it would not entirely surprise me if they were the senior partner in almost any district they were in. But that's the kind of philosophical difference. We were super careful not to break up municipalities, and we were super concerned to try to identify, like Germantown, for example. And it's not as if the LRAC did a terrible job on this, but we wanted to try, if at all possible, to draw a Senate district around Germantown, Gaithersburg, and Rockville, rather than somewhat artificially try to force Gaithersburg and Rockville into a district that would have to be almost like a barbell just of the 2 municipalities.
It seems to me that the measure that you all used in the Redistricting Commission was mainly about compactness, but the Court of Appeal seems to have a greater appetite to accept complaints around the issue of county breaks and perhaps even representativeness. And I'd imagine that the legislative districts on the other side are significantly about representativeness and their arguments about representativeness. So how do we balance these things?
Well, we also place very high priority on avoiding county breaks. And of course, we, like the legislature, were aware that they had struck down some earlier districts for not respecting county lines. So there are trade-offs between any of the areas. If we had done worse on county breaks while doing better on compactness, it would be one thing, but we did at least as well, or even, I believe, better on county breaks on the legislative districts, while we were also doing much better on compactness. So there's a third thing that we haven't mentioned, which also has a tension with both of those, which is the degree of population variance. And listeners who follow this area may know that when it comes to congressional maps, there is basically no tolerance for different populations between districts. They all have to be mathematically the same. When it comes to legislative districts, the courts have historically tolerated a 5% plus or minus 10% in all variation between districts. And leaving aside for now the issue of whether that variance is used for political advantage, as it has sometimes been in the past. There is a very definite trade-off between trying to get a closer population variance and trying to avoid county breaks particularly, because you can round off, and in fact in Montgomery County, we did round off getting exactly 8 Senate districts in Montgomery County, whereas the legislature did not and got 8 plus fraction. But that is one where you run into the trade-off between county breaks and an aspiration for the minimum possible population variance. We set ourselves a goal on population variance of 3% for delegate districts and 2% for Senate districts, and we made it. The legislature has wider variance on both of those, which again, had they been using that in order to get a lower number of county splits than us, it would be one thing, but they didn't. Again, when you go through this kind of traditional political scientist regimen of mathematical tests, and county splits can also be turned into a simple number to watch. I think we did a good job, much better than the earlier map from 10 years ago, and one which it appears compares favorably on each of the dimensions to what the legislature came up with.
So it's one thing to talk about the variance in the size, in the total size, and another thing completely to talk about communities and whether for example minority areas are being carved up and put into different majority districts so that the minorities community do not get a representative, or the other way, So that's a very, that's a very important part of this. Do you think that the legislative maps fail on that account as well? Because I'd imagine they would make the case for that very strongly.
I encourage everyone to go look up the numbers which are going to be publicly available in various places on how well each map does. Now, obviously, when you move to aspects of community of interest that can't be demographically quantified, then it's much harder to know who did what. But on the issue of Black communities, Hispanic communities, those numbers are reasonably strong. And as soon as our map came out and Princeton Gerrymandering Project rated our map, and I'm talking about the legislative map, although they also did for the congressional, you could see the array of Black, one of their tables is an array of Black population, including voting age population, and Hispanic, where you can see how many of them are above 50%, how many of them are above 40%, which in most cases will provide a good chance for the Black community to elect a candidate of their choice, should there be racial polarization, which are above 30%, which will often provide an important voice, even if not a choice for a united community. And again, I did not try to make myself an expert on how LRAC was doing its job, because that's their job. But now that I've had a chance to see some comparisons, I do think you will find, both for Black Marylanders and perhaps especially for Hispanic communities, and we spent a lot of time on the issue of where Hispanic voters lived, whether they saw themselves as part of a coherent community, because, as you know, different national origins are not necessarily going to see themselves as a particularly coherent community. But we heard testimony. We were lucky to have as an advisor Gloria Aparicio-Blackwell, well-known Maryland figure who was very well connected with many of the communities involved. And we spent a lot of time, especially in Montgomery County, and I believe our Montgomery County maps do give priority to this in a way that you then can tell if you look at the overall tables of which. If everyone agrees there is like one delegate district in Western Prince George's that you can turn into a more or less outright Hispanic district, but there are several others, especially in Montgomery County, where you can recognize the community well enough not to provide a majority vote, but to provide a substantial base for the community to make its interests felt, should it wish, through politics. And we spent a lot of effort on that. And I believe one of the things that allowed us to do it more effectively was that we were much more willing to use single-member districts. And we haven't talked about that, but that was the issue that we spent more time on than anything else. But you see how it ties in. I mean, around Wheaton and Aspen Hill, because we were happy to draw single-member districts, we could do better for the Hispanic community.
Can you explain that a little bit? Why would a multiple-member district help minority representation?
Well, you can see, I mean, let's talk about Howard County, for example, where there is a substantial Asian population, which tends to be concentrated down around, I believe, South Columbia, at Fulton, River Hill. If you have three-member districts, then that Asian community is inevitably going to be a fairly small percentage of whatever the triple-member districts are, because they've just got so many people in them. On the other hand, if you have single-member districting, then it is possible to have one of the three districts in that Senate district represent the areas where there is a substantial concentration of Asian American Howard County voters, and still won't be 50%, but it will be high enough to provide some encouragement if someone from that community believes that the community has been underrepresented. And I'm not saying that Howard County residents feel that way. I mean, Howard County is its own special case, but they apply this logic to the various places. In Frederick County, for example, the question was whether to maintain multi-member districting, as the LRAC map has a triple-member district around the city of Frederick. And they and we agreed that a state Senate district should be drawn around the city of Frederick so as not to break the city. But because we had three single-member districts in the Frederick County city district, one of ours could be majority-minority. And theirs is, of course, dominated by white voters, the Frederick city district. But
I thought you said, and maybe please correct me, that single-member districts end up representing minority groups better because they'll have smaller districts.
Yeah.
But the claim from Baltimore and Washington, D.C. suburbs, where the state's minority population is really concentrated, the feedback from those areas has been that they want to continue with multiple member districts. I
don't think there's actually a contradiction there. For example, we heard again and again from Prince George's County and from Baltimore City that they like their triple member districting. There's a couple of things. First, in practice, we heard from both sides, often from the politically active class. And there is no doubt in my mind that the politically active class in Montgomery, Prince George's, and Baltimore County likes the triple member districting. It is used to the idea of slating at the beginning. And I'd like to get to that in a minute, because this goes beyond the tension between minority and majority interests. There are reasons to think in heavily African-American parts of the state that single-member districting will occasionally result in some non-Black majority districts in parts of Baltimore, parts of Western Prince George's, and that therefore, again, it isn't predictably working for one racial group or another. It is more predictably helping local minorities, whether that be one group or another, to have their own particular chance to be locally represented. Now, let's talk about slating, because we heard again and again in defenses of the system from politically active people who were often aware of the political science literature on how minorities might be better protected with smaller districts. They said, but in practice, you see, in the slating decision, we make sure that there is multiracial representation. And so the slate in a district that would not have any Black majority sub-districts nonetheless includes, one Black person among the three. And vice versa, there is often one white person, even though whites could not necessarily elect. And I'm not disputing that that's often the way slating works. I think that slating has a very pervasive impact on the politics of the Maryland legislature in ways that I think are ripe for critique. How's that for a way of describing it? It forces a certain dependence on meetings that take place behind closed doors. It often forces a certain dependence by the delegates on the senator who agrees to lead the ticket and may want them or may not want them on their slate. And again, because of slating, you find that the actual decision of who gets to be a Maryland delegate takes place behind closed doors, no transparency, no public access in whether or not they get admitted to the slate or kicked off the slate. And this can't be good. I mean, honestly, who actually thinks this is an ideal way to run the system? The whole idea of primaries was that we were not going to let the party bosses decide who got in. And so you have that, and you have beyond that, whether or not it affects the raw count of representation for any one minority group. And again, as I say, look at the LRAC map versus ours. I believe ours creates simply a larger number of districts that are likely to be within the influence of Black and Hispanic voters than theirs does. But leaving that aside, different people will get elected. Very often under slating, whether you get onto the slate, the slate wants to be demographically representative, but it also wants people who will play ball. And so disruptive personalities, disruptive political points of view that may be locally popular enough to win in a smaller district, they instead, and maybe they're going for ideological representativeness too, with a moderate Democrat versus a more extremely progressive Democrat. But again, it discourages independent, maverick, and insurgent politics, in my view. I know we've got some insurgents who have won nonetheless, and of course they've won for Senate seats where slating is not particularly the issue. There is now only about 6 or 8 states that still have multi-member districting, and you know why? It's because Voting Rights Act litigation has targeted multi-member districting on exactly the logic I've been talking about, and has tended to get states with multi-member districts either struck down or voluntarily changed to single-member district systems for fear of losing a Voting Rights Act. So that's part of it. But the hasn't happened in Maryland. Maryland has its own way. Most states that have multi-member districting have 2 delegate for 1 Senate, or whatever they call them, 2 assembly for 1 Senate. And I think Maryland is alone in having 3. And then states like New Hampshire and Vermont have their own wacky systems that I'm not going to talk about, but which may have 8. But one of the lines of testimony we heard a great deal was, women do better in the Maryland General Assembly, and multi-member districting is part of that because it's easier for them to be part of a balanced slate. And I don't disagree with that, because the political literature about the 2 delegate states, the ones that have 2 delegates nesting in 1 Senate system, find that women do tend to do quite well because those 2-member slates are often a man and a woman. That literature suggests that there is, through desires to get slate balance, you may get some advantages for women, even though, as you know, looking at the congressional map, something went wrong with Maryland, where a state that once had 4 of 8 of its Congress members be females, keeps on going with 0. So Maryland has something that isn't quite working well. Maryland public opinion is not particularly polarized on wanting to move to a better system. Approximately the same percentage, and it's around 70% of Republicans and independents and Democrats. Now, you may see that as an artifact of the fact that the Democrats did the redistricting, and so were we in a different state, Republicans would be less enthusiastic. We have managed to equalize, but nonetheless, and I don't mean, I'm if anything praising the governor's political skills on this. Where public opinion is, you will very often find Larry Hogan to be in that same spot. It's one of the reasons why he's so fantastically popular, is that he identifies issues that people really, a consensus has formed. And despite what just happened in Annapolis with the congressional maps, and despite what may happen momentarily with legislative maps, the public opinion consensus is still there and is not going away anytime soon. People want something better.
Walter Olson, thank you for coming on I Hate Politics. I'm going to be watching those cases very, very closely, and I hope you'll come back.
I hope so. Thank you for having me on.
What lessons can we draw from these conversations with Doug Mayer and Walter Olson? First, reforming the electoral districting process is a long-standing demand in the political agenda for both Republicans and Democrats. In Republican-dominated Texas and other states, Democrats lay claim to the importance of fairness and justice and reform. In Democratic-dominated Maryland, Republicans pursue fairness and justice and reform. Second, Walter Olson and Doug Mayer point out that there is considerable public support for reform. But mind you, it is support for the abstract notion that something must be done. As soon as Democrats are told about the actions Republicans take in Republican states, they quickly back down from the idea of unilateral disarmament, like they were Kennedy and Khrushchev. Then, when they find out that Judicial Watch, a national right-wing group, and Fair Maps Maryland, an instrument created by a former Hogan aide, are behind the lawsuits, the reform agenda truly stalls. The Republicans who have filed the lawsuits know this, and they are really testing the appetite of the Maryland Court of Appeals to intervene in the political process in an election year. The Ohio Supreme Court just did. Will the Maryland court oblige? Third, the best hope really is a national solution. I spoke to State Delegate Gabriel Severo in December after he had voted against the Congressional Redistricting plan passed by the Democratic Supermajority General Assembly in Annapolis. Here is what he had to say.
So this was a principal vote for me. I think gerrymandering is wrong, no matter the political party. And whether it's in Republican or Democratic states, the reason why our politics is so divisive and so extreme is because we have a current system of representatives carving up district boundaries. Democracy, or at least the future of democracy in this country, has to depend on independent redistricting, devoid of partisan politics. And for me, what I would like to see is both political parties investing their energy in pushing for the passage of the Freedom to Vote Act, which bans partisan gerrymandering. There's also a bill that Jamie Raskin put in to create a nonpartisan redistricting commission for congressional districts. You also have the Fair Representation Act that's been introduced in the Congress. So there's a number of things that we can do to sort of change our politics. But I felt like since the last redistricting 10 years ago, we had ample time and opportunity to develop a different system than the one that we have right now. And it was just about a principal vote. I just couldn't support gerrymandering, and I didn't support the governor's commission either.
I should point out that Congress has not been able to move a voting rights bill, and redistricting reform appears unlikely at this moment. Finally, a little political science. You may have noticed my conversation with Walter Olson turned from redistricting to multiple member and single member districts, then to the pros and cons of slating. Electoral design is a fascinating field of study with one consensus. There is no perfect electoral system. We are constantly balancing different parts of it. All the interconnections between different aspects of our election system really are a work in progress. We keep tinkering with it to get to the best outcome we want, often driven by our partisan interests. But that is the best we can do. At some point, we just have to go out and win elections.
She does this thing with her hips when she swerves and she dips when the music's not even playing. She does this thing with her eyes, keeps me mesmerized all day. She does this thing to my heart, makes it stop and start. I think it might stop pumping sideways. She does this thing to my head, you know she's...
That's all for this episode. You've been listening to I Hate Politics. I'm Sunil Dasgupta. Music for this episode comes from the Airport 77s, a 70s power pop and new wave band from Silver Spring. Andy Sullivan on vocals and guitar, Chuck Dolan on bass, and John Kelly on drums. We are playing songs from their 2021 album, Rotation. If you want to share your music on the show or know someone who might want to, please email us at ihppod@gmail.com or reach out on Twitter at ihppod. I hope you'll subscribe and share the podcast as we bring you stories about politics close to you and your home. See you next time.